Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well. It's 2:30 on Sunday, reflecting on some of the fights that have happened over the course of the weekend. And it's been a relatively big weekend of action. We had a big card in the States with Malignaggi, Garcia, Sergio Mora versus Danny Jacobs. We had action in New Zealand with Joseph Parker fighting. We had action in the UK, Campbell, Coyle, Brian Rose versus Carson Jones. Ricky Burns in action, Whyte in action. So a few fights to talk about. Without further ado, I'm going to get straight into it. So I'm on a limited time scale here today, and there's a lot of fights to talk about. So I'm going to take a few fights, and I'm going to rattle through them very, very quickly. A few fights that I think are slightly less interesting, slightly less to discuss about. And then as we get into it, we'll maybe talk about some of the more interesting fights in a tad bit more detail. As always, with these formats, if you're watching, if you're joining in, please do comment. Please let me know your thoughts. Please let me know any points you'd like me to discuss or any sort of agreements, disagreements you have with what I'm saying. Anyway, without further ado, I'll get straight into it. The first fight I want to talk about is Sergio Mora versus Danny Jacobs. In this fight, I predicted Danny Jacobs would probably win by KO. And the way, it happened even sooner than I expected, to be honest. Sergio Mora was finished in the second round. Give you a brief breakdown. Danny Jacobs looked good round one, caught Sergio, dropped him. But you could tell from the way Sergio went down and got up that Sergio wasn't badly rattled. He'd been dropped fair and square, but he was still very much in the fight. Danny Jacobs then made a really poor mistake, and it was again something that I commented on in my pre-fight video. But for me, Jacobs is over eager to get the stoppage done. He literally ran at Sergio Mora, who's an experienced vet who clearly wasn't in that much trouble after taking the knockdown, and he abandoned his defences. And Sergio Mora hit him with an absolute peach of a hook. Just Sergio backed off, kept the distance, waited till Jacobs got in range, and just caught Jacobs clean with a hook and dropped Jacobs badly. But Jacobs got up, he was able to get back into the fight, he wasn't out of it, but you could tell his legs were a bit weak and he got properly knocked down by the light punching Sergio Mora. The way that punch landed, how clean it was, how open Jacobs was, let me tell you now, if that was Peter Quillen, if that was Gennady Golovkin, if that was Miguel Cotto, if that was David Lemieux, it would have been game over. Jacobs, we've seen him stopped in a fight before. That would have been game over. For me, Jacobs is an interesting fighter. He brings a lot to the table, but realistically, he needs to stop this over-eagerness with regards to getting the KO. What he did today, or yesterday against Sergio, was so poor, it was really reminiscent of Deontay Wilder coming in and windmilling on opponents when he gets them hurt, and he's lucky that Sergio Mora is very light-handed, because had that been another fighter, that would have been game over for Danny Jacobs there. Anyway, second round, Jacobs came out strong, was dominating. Sergio was having some effectiveness, but in classic sort of Sergio, defensive, technical-minded way. Jacobs caught him. Sergio went over. Sergio's legs seemed to buckle. He got some sort of ankle injury on the way down. I think he was claiming his ankle was broken. Whether it was or not, we don't know. But anyway, Sergio probably could have fought on from the punch. He managed to injure himself. There's some debate going on as to whether the fight should be a no contest or not. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, it looked to me like Danny Jacobs did knock Sergio down. What I would say is I don't think it was the punch that stopped Sergio. I think it was the ankle injury. So, potential, there is some argument for a no contest there. People were talking about the rematch. I don't particularly want to see the rematch. Sergio Mora isn't the most eye-catching, entertaining fighter. He's not got an upwards trajectory these days. There's been a lot of talk about Danny Jacobs, Peter Quillen. I know Peter Quillen's a bit of an enigma. Does he want to box? What weight is he going to box at? Has he got other commitments outside the ring? But let me tell you, Peter Quillen, on his day, I will be picking handily to beat Danny Jacobs, For me, Danny Jacobs, he rushes in too much. I think he can be beaten from range, and I think he can get caught. And as I say, the way the way Sergio caught him yesterday, if that was Peter Quillen with Quillen's power, for me that would be game over. I think Danny Jacobs is a good fighter. I think he's a solid top 10 middleweight, but I think he needs to analyse his game and make 1 or 2 changes. And I still think he's quite some way away from the top 4 or 5 in the division in my eyes. So I mean, that's that fight. Jacobs goes on, second round KO, keeps his knockout streak alive. But really, I think he needs to calm it down a bit and work on other aspects of his game rather than just the relentless offense that he seems to like to operate with. Switching continents, we'll talk UK. Ricky Burns came back at lightweight against an opponent. I might have got his name wrong, so apologies if I have. I think it was Prince of Fotsu. You know, Ricky Burns did well in the fight. You know, he was clearly ahead. Dubious stoppage, I think, in the 5th round. The corner threw the towel in. Jim Watt was outraged. There was some debate as to whether it was or wasn't the right time to pull the opponent out. As far as I could make out, I was quite relieved that it was stopped because it wasn't the most enthralling of action. And, you know, I wasn't overly keen to sit through another 3 rounds. I mean, the thing about Ricky Burns is he doesn't carry much power. He isn't the most immediately eye-catching fighter to watch. For me, he's nowhere near as fan-friendly as like a Kevin Mitchell in terms of the attractiveness of the action he puts in the ring. But Ricky Burns is back. I wonder, you know, for me now, Ricky Burns, I view him as like an opponent rather than somebody who's genuinely going to go on and win world titles. I wonder if they'll use him as a sort of step-up fight for Luke Campbell in 2 or 3 months' time. Even occurred to me, is that the purpose of having Ricky Burns on the bill, you know, to get him out in front of the whole fans so he could face the winner of Campbell Coyle. You know, the lightweight division, there's some weak fighters in and around the top of the division. You know, you've got Kerry Flanagan, Anthony Crolla, Darlys Perez. You know, these sort of guys, maybe Ricky Burns could stand a chance against. It's funny, he fought well against Figueroa in I think was it Mexico or in Texas when he went out there. But in these lower level fights, you don't see him fighting as well as when his game is raised, even in a losing effort against these kind of guys. So Ricky Burns got the job done in 5. Brian Rose, he won a 12-round decision against Carson Jones. Carson Jones, slightly disappointing effort from Carson Jones. You know, he wasn't really throwing much lever. He wasn't really bringing the fight. I'm going to be completely honest, and I'm not just saying this to get a cheap laugh. This is genuine honesty. I actually fell asleep during the end of this fight. So I think I fell asleep rounds 11, 12 of this fight and subsequently missed Campbell Coyle. But what's that? This morning there was a stream uploaded of the fight on YouTube, so I was able to catch up with it and watch it then. But this fight did put me to sleep. And I think it put me to sleep at the point where I realised that Carson Jones wasn't really posing much of a threat. You know, Brian Rose had weathered the early storm. Brian Rose was badly hurt in round 2. It looked for a time like Carson Jones may well be able to get a knockout on Brian Rose again. But yeah, Brian Rose survived that. Carson Jones wasn't having a high enough output. It looked like Brian Rose even was going to labour to a victory and just outpoint Carson Jones. And yet again, for me, it wasn't the most enthralling performance from Brian Rose. You know, he was a lot bigger than Carson Jones. I think this fight was made at 11.4, so just 2 pounds below the middleweight limit. And I think Brian Rose, I'm right in saying, initially weighed in overweight. So we're talking about 2 guys who are different weight sizes, really. Brian Rose obviously wanting to compete at middleweight. Carson Jones, in my mind, is more of a welterweight than a light middleweight, let alone a middleweight. And you can see a bit of a size difference there in the ring. But despite that, from my eyes, Brian Rose wasn't really hurting Carson Jones whatsoever. As I say, Carson Jones rocked him, hurt him round 2. It looked like he may be able to get him out of there. But when it didn't come, Brian Rose was able to stick to his boxing mostly. He got sucked into a bit of a phone booth style fight at times, but stick to his boxing and get the win. From my eyes, Brian Rose is not going anywhere fast, I'll tell you that much. Maybe if he steps up to middleweight, he could fight the John Ryders, the Nick Blackwells of this world. Maybe those would be competitive fights, I'm not sure. But if he, Carson Jones is average. He's a durable journeyman type, but he's an average fighter. And the way Carson Jones was able to hurt him, the way he was able to cause Brian Rose a lot of trouble over the 2 fights, makes me really question what Brian Rose has to offer. Yeah, we know when he stepped up to the world level against Andre, he got badly outclassed and beaten. Will the same thing happen again? Very, very possibly. For me, he's out of his depth at anything above Carson Jones kind of level, and I think Carson Jones will, could have almost stopped him again. So his upside is very limited in my eyes. Anyway, moving on from those 3 fights, let's talk Dillian Whyte briefly. Dillian Whyte did a fair job on Vito Costa Jr. Christian Hamer went the distance with this guy. This guy took David Price 6. I think this guy took Joseph Parker 4 rounds. I predicted it would be an early night for Dillian. I predicted that Dillian would get him out of there in less than 4 rounds. I said that Dillian wouldn't necessarily break his streak of not going beyond 4 rounds. I didn't necessarily think it would happen quite this early. Costa Jr., as I said in my pre-fight, is a pretty terrible opponent, despite his size, despite his record. He plods forward, he offers very little offensively, he's there to hit, he's got very limited movement, he's quite a slow, sluggish opponent. And Dillian Whyte was able to really tee off on him. The punches Whyte was landing, they didn't look overly clean, overly snappy, but he's obviously very, very heavy-handed. I think both times he kind of landed a straight right and then a little cuffing left hook. I think it's the left hook that Whyte's really known for as his power punch. But regardless of that, he got the job done. He got Costa Jr. out of there in under 1 round, and you'd have to say he looked good doing it. I mean, hate this fight aside, because we know Dillian Whyte has got the power and got the capability to take out these guys in 1 round or 2 rounds or whatever. I'm starting to buy into the Dillian Whyte hype train more and more. He's not. His work isn't as eye-catching as Joshua's. He doesn't look as devastating an operator as Anthony Joshua from my sofa. But some of the stuff that he's saying outside the ring and his demeanour and the way he holds himself and the way he acts, I really think that this guy has got the sort of personality to be a champion. It's amazing what he did when he was on his ban, how he kept himself in training, flogged himself out for sparring, wanting to stay active. And he did a very extended interview with IFL TV. It's about 40 minutes long, but I watched that and he said some really interesting things for a young up-and-coming fighter. He said, the reason Jonathan Banks liked me is I don't like Vladimir Klitschko. And when I went out there to spar with Vladimir, I thought, I'm not going to let him bully me. If he's pushing me, I'm going to throw him back and I'm going to come out there and, I just thought, this guy really knows his own mind. He's very strong-willed. Who goes to a Vladimir Klitschko sparring camp and instead of crapping yourself, you say, I don't like Vladimir. I'm going to try and cause him a bit of bother. So I like that about him. Thought he also made a very good point about Anthony Joshua. This is building up to the hype. He said Joshua was criticising me and calling me a drug cheat for taking an over-counter supplement that I didn't realise was banned. But who's Joshua to make negative comments about me when he was earning taxpayers' money as a sort of amateur Olympian type? He was out selling drugs. So how can you call me a drug cheat and make comments about me as a drug cheat when Anthony Joshua was actually a drug dealer? Which I thought was interesting. And Dillian Whyte, he just strikes me as a solid, fearless type guy. And as I say, I'm beginning to like him more and more. I'm interested to see where he goes from here. Interested to see who will fight next. It'll be a step up from Costa Jr., I hope, but it probably won't be a world beater because they won't want to do anything to. They won't want to do anything to derail the Joshua Dillian Whyte fight. But for me, Dillian Whyte is an opponent with no fear and a huge desire to win. And his recent association with Jonathan Banks, this shows that this is a guy with upside. He's not just coming in to lose to Anthony Joshua. He's got some legs in his career. So I'm buying into the Dillian Whyte hype train. And I think the way Dillian's carrying on, even if he does lose to Joshua, then potentially he's he's still got a future ahead of him. And maybe the way he's talking and the way he's presenting himself, he could still be with Matchroom. Just been joined by a few people in the chat. Hello, Megan, how you doing? Bart says, the fact that Whyte has banks and the revelation that Whyte presumably has a longer reach than Joshua, as commented by a few people on your video in the past. That jab. It's interesting, isn't it? For what it's worth, Bart, I don't think Dillian Whyte would be best served trying to jab it out with Joshua. Even though he's supposedly got this tactician trainer, even though he's supposedly got long reach, I don't really see Dillian Whyte outpointing Joshua with a jab over a 12-round chess match. You know, Dillian Whyte's got to push Joshua back. He's got to test out Joshua's defences. He's got to test out Joshua's inside game. He's got to make sure he's not at the end of Joshua's long 1-2 in my eyes. But Whyte, he looks like a durable type. It's easy to say he looks like a durable type till he gets hit by someone who's top quality. But for me, that fight is becoming really, really interesting. And initially, I was saying 80-20 in favour of Joshua. I'm really buying into the Whyte bandwagon now. I still think Joshua's a favourite, but I'm seeing it more 70-30, 60-40, rather than 80-20 in favour of Joshua. And I think their height will continue. We'll see how Joshua looks against Gary Cornish. That'll be another interesting test, because that's someone with longer reach than Joshua, I would presume. Anyway, moving on from that fight, let's talk Luke Campbell versus Tommy Coyle. I must say, I got my major prediction wrong, which is Paulie versus Danny Garcia. We'll come on to that in a moment. I got that one wrong. But I got a lot of the predictions right. I got Dillian Whyte right. I got Joseph Parker right. I got Campbell right. I got Danny Jacobs right. I think I got Brian Rose right. Yeah, so I got a lot of them right. Just the one I actually went to the bookies and put money on, I got that one wrong, which is fairly typical. Luke Campbell, Tommy Coyle wasn't really an interesting fight to my eyes. As I say, I actually fell asleep. Brian Rose put me to sleep. I'm probably the first person he's ever knocked out, and I actually slept through it. But I watched it this morning. I must admit, I'll just be completely open. I watched it on YouTube. It wasn't the best quality internet connection when I was watching it, so I won't talk in too much depth about the fight, because I don't want to lecture on it and analyse on it, you know, when I haven't watched it in pristine quality. But for me, Campbell was just a few levels above, you know, his boxing capability, his timing. I like the way he finished off Tommy Coyle. You know, Campbell is clearly not a mega puncher. He wasn't able to knock Coyle out. He wasn't able to devastate him. Coyle kept getting up, but he was all over him. You know, he didn't give Coyle a moment. And the second Campbell got him hurt in that 10th round, it looked like it was game over. Yeah, Coyle, he's a warrior. He's likeable. He's got a lot of heart. I think it's the second round he got dropped to the body, but he got up. He fought on. He never quits. You know, he keeps going. Fair play, very fair play to him for doing that. But I think, as he said himself after the fight, he's a British level fighter, and Luke Campbell's looks like he's above that. And to be honest, the UK lightweight scene, I think, is vastly overrated at the minute. You know, Kevin Mitchell's a decent fighter, but Anthony Crolla, Terry Flanagan, Derry Matthews, Ricky Burns, for me, Luke Campbell is well above all of those guys. You know, you got a load of guys there who don't carry punching power, who really smother their work, who don't have clean, crisp combinations. Yeah, for me, Luke Campbell is a dangerous operator at lightweight, and I think Kevin Mitchell aside, maybe he's the number 2 lightweight in the UK right now. I'd rate him that highly. I'm not utterly convinced on him. You know, the level of opposition he's been in with is limited at best, but he did a decent job, professional job. As I say, I need to watch the fight back again on a more clear stream. But yeah, to be fair to Luke Campbell, he did a very, very professional job, and he showed that he was levels above Tommy Coyle. Megan says, I recently read that Tony Thompson blew a ped test after the second Price fight. He's apparently buried for 2 years because of some UK-US boxing politics thing. What are your thoughts on this? It's an interesting one. So I read that Thompson had taken some medication because he's got high blood pressure, and he had informed the British Boxing Board of Control that that would mean he would have certain test results or whatever. Cut a long story short, obviously Tony Thompson failed the drug test. I think there's been some sort of legal discussions. He was given some ban in Britain. He's appealed it, he's fought it. Yeah, to my eyes, Tony Thompson is a less likely PED taker than some of the guys out there. You know, he doesn't. I know there's a lot more to PEDs than having a six-pack and having massive punching power. I'm not going to say it's that simple, but he doesn't really fit the hallmark of what you'd anticipate for a PED user to be like. You know, he's been brought in as an opponent. If I recall, he turned up in below average shape. He didn't look like a big puncher. And I know I'm massively oversimplifying it. You don't need to point out that PEDs can affect people in different ways, etc. All in all, I'm just going on my gut here. My gut is that Tony Thompson was just on some high blood pressure medicine. And, you know, looking at the shape of him when he was fighting David Price the first time round, I think it's very likely he did have high blood pressure, because he'd certainly been eating a few hot dogs, let's put it that way. Do I see him? Yeah, let's be honest, he went on from that fight and he lost in fights against like likes of Carlos the Clown, Pulev. I think he beat Price fair and square. But that's not an educated opinion, Megan. That's just my gut instinct rather than anything else. Sarah, hey Sarah, she says hello. Tom says lost a lot of money last night by Paulie failing to head a bell. Had Garcia on points for evens. Piss take that ref. Yeah, yes and no. I lost money on the fight as well, Tom. We're in the same boat. Paulie didn't do very much though, did he? He didn't show the ref too much. You know, he's faded Paulie. If you look at the Paulie who fought Adrian Broner compared to the Paulie who fought last night, it was a much lesser performance. You know, now we're on the subject. Let's get on to that fight. Danny Garcia and Paulie Malignaggi, neither of them impressed me. Neither of them impressed me at all. Paulie should give it up, and I think he's going to give it up. I think he said he's going to retire. Yeah, I don't know if it's age, if it's the fact that he's got other commitments outside the ring, but there's just a lack of quality coming from him last night. His jab and movement wasn't as dominant as it's been before against, you know, the Adrian Broners of this world. He couldn't hurt Garcia, and Garcia was quite literally able to hunt him down, chase him down, and wear him down. I mean, don't get me wrong, Garcia seemed to be bigger than Paulie. He seemed to have grown into 147. There's some big reddening on Malignaggi's face, reddening on his body. Garcia can clearly hit a little bit at 147. He still doesn't strike me as a massive puncher, you know. But for me, it probably was the right time to stop the fight. Malignaggi was wobbled badly. He was backed up. He was being chased around by a younger, fitter man who was determined to take his head off. And I do think, had the ref not jumped in round 10, round 11, we'd have seen Paulie dropped and hurt and probably knocked out, because Garcia was coming on. Malignaggi wasn't able to keep him off anymore. Yeah, I think the spring had gone out of Malignaggi's step, and he was more of a sitting target. What I would say about Garcia is, for me, Garcia, and I know this is critical, but Garcia does very little. He does very little very well. You know, I know Dwyer calls him a mid-range hooker, and I think that pretty much sums him up. You know, his movement is average, his jab is average. He seems to be durable. For me, his power is average. Technically, he's average. He doesn't have much of a jab. I still think that he's an L waiting to happen. I do think he will lose at some stage. I think fundamentally someone out there will be able to outbox him. I think Amir Khan in a rematch. I think obviously Floyd Mayweather. There are guys out there who are going to beat him. But to be fair to Danny Garcia, and I must say this about Garcia, he is developing a real impressive resume. I mean, I know Malignaggi is a so-so opponent. You know, maybe he's a B-class fighter rather than an A-class fighter these days. And that's fine, but Malignaggi's a name. And if you look at Garcia's resume, the names are thick and fast there. And he's beaten some really good people. And in terms of resume alone, you'd have to say Danny Garcia is pound for pound top 10, maybe even pound for pound top 5. In terms of skill set, I don't put him even in that pound for pound top 10 discussion. But it's going to get to a point, if he keeps winning, if he keeps beating these kind of guys, we're going to have to start thinking about him. Because whether you like him or not, and I am inclined not to like him based on what I see in ring, whether you like him or not, the guy keeps winning, and the guy is beating a decent level of opposition. I know there's Rod Salford. I know there's people who don't think Malignaggi, the win against Malignaggi is worth anything. But, you know, Khan, Malignaggi, Herrera, Matisse, yeah, the list goes on. I heard talks of Sean Porter next time out. I mean, whether that will happen or not, we'll have to see. But that's another big fight if that goes ahead. And that's probably another fight where I'd be inclined to pick against Garcia, and I'd probably be inclined to pick against Garcia in that fight. But he keeps winning. He's often in fights where, especially against like Amir Khan, probably against Lucas Matisse, where he's not the betting favourite, he's not the most likely winner, but he keeps winning, and I guess you've got to respect that. But for me, he's a guy who can be outboxed. I think his power's overrated. I don't think he's got much technique. And I do see him taking an L at some point. Funny enough, I know this fight will get a lot of hate, but I think stylistically, Chris Algieri could have the beating on Danny Garcia as well. I think Chris Algieri is not an outrageously dissimilar fighter to Paulie Malignaggi, but I think Algieri's younger, he's got more ambition, more movement, and just sort of more size, and he's a bit stronger. Amigan, I thought Coyle did better than most things. He kept coming forward and he was catching them on the inside. I think British level is a harsh thing to say, but he can be honest with himself. Thing is, Amigan, how many British lightweights are there that you'd pick over Tommy Coyle? You know, I bet you could name 6 or 7 you'd pick over Tommy Coyle. Sarah, Paulie had no ambition last night. He was pretty slick, but no real drive to win. Garcia didn't look great either. Totally agree with that comment. Totally agree. Amigan, Paulie retired post-fight. Thought you might have. Tom, you're right. I was probably reacting more for the money. I didn't factor into my bet that the ref would save Paulie a beating because of a lack of ambition and because he's a legend. Paulie to retire and Danny to lose when he gets a proper test. Again, I'm agreeing with all of these comments today. I think you're spot on there, Tom. Amigan, I don't think Garcia needs to fight with Khan. I would rather see him with Broner, just because Broner's called him out repeatedly. Porter and Provodnikov. Thing is, right, is Broner, he needs to drop down a weight, clearly. If he doesn't drop down a weight, he's just going to keep losing. Provodnikov, I don't think he's fighting at 147. I think he's fighting at 140. Stylistically as well, I think Garcia can beat the Provodnikovs of this world. You know, Garcia probably beats guys who aren't technical boxers. I think the guys who beat him are the Paulie Malinaggis of this world, you know, but the higher caliber versions. And by that, I don't mean Paulie isn't a high caliber version, but I mean the current Paulie Malignaggi is too old, not physical enough. I think someone like Chris Algieri, someone like Amir Khan, I'm not saying they're Paulie Malignaggi Mark IIs, but people who can throw straight punches, people who can move, people with speed, people with slickness maybe. I think they can give him a real test. He doesn't need to fight against Amir Khan. No, I mean, Danny Garcia is a big name and a big deal now. But as I say, he's assembled a very, very impressive resume. Anyway, the other fight I wanted to talk about, and as I said, I can't talk for too long, so I'll probably run for another 5-10 minutes. Any more comments, any questions, leave them in the chat section. But the other fight I wanted to talk about briefly, Joseph Parker versus Barry Tucker. Now, I did a video yesterday to discuss that in more detail. It was a 40-second fight, slightly strange ending, but it happens in heavyweight boxing when a big punch catches someone on a strange place of the head. So I won't go through it in too much detail because if you're interested, please check out the video I've already uploaded. What I would say is Joseph Parker is a serious talent. I've been talking about him on my channel for a long time. Yeah, speed, athleticism, power, punch variety, combinations. He's a really good fighter. I would strongly recommend anyone who hasn't started watching this guy to get on the bandwagon now. He's a Kiwi heavyweight, and he's got a lot of money, a lot of support behind him. And for me, he could go to the top. He really could. For me, he's at least as exciting a prospect as Joshua, Whyte, Hughie Fury. You know, he does certain things better than some of those guys are. And yeah, for me, Joseph Parker is going to be the real deal. He got rid of Barry Tupu in 40 seconds. You know, I think Barry Tupu was overrated slightly. I thought he was a very, very beatable opponent. Top 50 at best. But Parker's on the fringe of fighting some big names now. He's fought several people at that sort of level. He's been brought along nicely. He's probably 18 months, 2 years of world title scene, in my opinion. But he's so young. He's 23 years old. He's got so much ahead of him. I urge everyone to check him out. Sarah, have you spoke about the Jones versus Rose rematch yet? That was a good old fight. I have, Sarah. I must admit, you have to check back in the video, but that fight put me to sleep, literally. And I made a little joke earlier, so I'll repeat it for you. But I think I'm the first person Brian Rose has ever knocked out. You know, once Rose weathered the storm, once it looked, you know, we were talking two average fighters here. One who used boxing, one who had very low output. Brian Rose is just going to get knocked out again when he steps up in level. And Carson Jones is nothing special. Carson Jones is very small to be fighting at middleweight, and he was able to hurt him, almost stop him in that earlier part of that fight. Tom, it's a bit early, but any initial predictions on method of victory for the Groves versus Badou Jack fight? That fight could go any and every way. I do not rule out any result in that fight. My initial lean would be towards Groves by KO. Groves is a big, big puncher. Look at what he did to Paul Smith. Look at what he did to Carl Froch in the first fight. Guy can really hit. Badou Jack, he's improved. He's impressed me a lot recently. The win over Durrell was unexpected and very impressive. But just remember him getting absolutely splattered by Derek Edwards. And for me, and for my money, Groves punches a lot harder than Derek Edwards. But you have to let me know your thoughts on that. I think that's one that's going to go on the Mayweather undercard potentially. What I would say is Badou Jack's been looking better and better recently. George Groves has been looking worse and worse. So the momentum maybe towards Badou Jack. Groves is not a safe person to put your money on. There's a lot of risk in betting on George Groves. He seems to be low stamina. There's holes in his game. He's got an average chin. But I think he's got too much for Badou Jack potentially, and I would side with George Groves. Anyway, I want a bit of a tight time scale, as I keep saying, so I won't talk for any longer. Thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please give us a thumbs up, like the video. I've got a few interesting videos coming out in the next week. I've got a few big things planned, so please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, and I don't want you to miss out on any future stuff. Thanks for watching, everyone. Amegan, Sarah, Tom, Bart, everyone who's joining on the chat. Been a pleasure as always. Hope you all have a good afternoon, and I'll catch you very soon. Cheers.